Welcome to another special report with Jessie Czebotar. This is Jessie Czebotar with KingdomLivingWithJessie.com. What I'm coming forward today with is what I'll call a special report based on a pattern of practice that I see out of my experience with the what we'll call the system. So there's things that, I see every day that, the system uses to communicate to one another where they're operating, how they're working, and what they're doing. So according to that, there are times when I pick up things, and according to that pattern of practice, I feel that they're important to bring forward because of what feel I see being communicated. So that's what I want to bring forward today. Let me go to a screen share here. So to start off, you can find a lot of my information, especially that about the system, on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com, particularly in the Unveiling of the System series, where I get into the system as well as their sovereign military order. You can also find my affidavits and special reports on the website of timothycharleshomeseth.com, and you'll find a lot of pertinent information on there that I've put in affidavit or shared in my testimony. So what I was actually seeing was a flyer that went up online. What I want to point out first is that, this flyer goes to a web page. When we go to that web page, which is for Charlie Kirk's tribute and service, we see here something very similar at the bottom, but there are some differences from what's on the website versus what's on the flyer. Notice particularly the top portion here, that's going to be different from the flyer, as well as this portion down here about the lineup of speakers. And you have, where it says more are to be announced. So we'll get back to this flyer in a moment, or the website, but what I want to show is in this flyer kind of initially what caught my attention. Within the system, one of the base symbols that they're going to use is what we call the threefold colonnades in Solomonic magic. You see it here behind me, as well as I have it here out of one of the system's books that they use in teaching about Solomonic magic in connection with Kabbalah magic and the Golden Dawn. And this is out of the book, Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn. You see the base Solomonic threefold colonnade where you have a straight line that's going to come all the way down. You have a crossbar going across. You have two colonnade supports here on the side. Then you see within that you have a man that's on the cross and his arms are outstretched. Now, usually the head is going to be right here on this in this imagery. And this also, the same image is what we see in the Jesuit Catholic churches where Christ is still on the cross. It really is not representing Christ to the individuals in the system. It's representing this image of the man with his arms stretched across and ascending into his godhood. And further in their image, they're going to show that man with his feet standing on the head of a woman, and that woman with her feet standing upon this image here, what looks like a Q with the Leviathan in it. And this goes back to some of their ancient contracts where you have the contract between Jezebel, a woman, and representing also the entity of Ashtaroth, and standing on the Leviathan, the woman being, the one who's making the contracts for the waterways of the womb between Ashtaroth and Leviathan. So, you know, as we look further at this, oftentimes these images, these two poles, you'll see them in the Masonic lodges, you'll see them in different places. They're going to, you know, they'll recognize these and see them. One, will be called the Boaz pole, the other will be called the Joachim pole, and they're going to have the image of the sun over the one that's considered the male and the crescent moon over the one that's considered the female. Now, in Masonry, these poles will, and in Solomonic magic, will be called the Boaz and the Joachim poles. We see them in scripture, also called that with the Temple of Solomon. We also see them in scripture being raised up on the high places and being called, the Baal and the Ashtaroth poles. We see them in the Golden Dawn under two other names where they're called the Solomon and the Neptune poles. So it's the same poles. They're just going to have different names for them based on, what their teachings and what type of magic they're engaging in. So that's the base formation. We see a straight line here. And even, this image up here in the Ascension, it's common. They'll sometimes show that as an angel. They could show it just as a sunshine. For the high priestesses, they'll show it as a crescent moon with horns, that look like horns facing up. But you'll also see this image of a dove that is either ascending or descending. So that's what we see in this flyer. We see this vertical line, then we see a cross line here. We see, in the place where the man would be in this image, we see the image of Trump. We see in the place where the supports would be a male and a female, right? And then we see a dove up here, that looks like it's flying the flag over the image of the man. Then, even in this flyer, they have a woman, and then you see a bottom portion here, um, and it goes to the website. So, just in what I regularly, am trained to and taught to pick up, this to me says there's something of concern. And what is the biggest concern for me? We know that there's a movement that has been targeting our president. I feel a lot of those individuals who are connected to that movement of Q, um, that, behind the scenes, they have been working with a lot of survivors, taking a lot of survivor testimonies. Behind the scenes, I've brought out in several shows, there's been a targeting and a push on rumors, individuals claiming that Trump or Elon Musk are the Antichrist. I've addressed those rumors and put out information about the system and their beliefs and where some of those rumors could be coming from, why, there may be a push in that in regards to the system and their end time views and, how we can know who isn't the Antichrist and the things that we're looking for who is the Antichrist. But in that, in that movement too, there are survivors I've brought out that are programmed and trained to take out the Antichrist. So one of my concerns is that in seeing this imagery, um, it could very well trigger some of those survivors who are programmed to take out the Antichrist. And who in that, who would they target? It would be our president. So that is a concern of mine, and I want to make sure that I bring that forward. Now, some of the other things as we begin to look at this, um, you've got a couple names here at the bottom. There are some unaffirmed claims about one of these individuals that I feel are important to bring out because these individuals, if these names are on the bottom, the lineup, if the lineup is communicating things according to the pattern of practice of communication in the system, then you have these two bottom individuals, on that Kabbalah um, ladder that would be standing on the Leviathan head on the queue. And some of the unaffirmed claims, when you look into this individual, are that, there was an issue between him and Elon Musk. Um, you can look into my testimony about things that I've testified to about Elon's experience in the system as a child. And, you know, if there's an issue with this individual, I think that, that should be looked into. The second thing is that there's unaffirmed claims that this individual, Sergio Gore, placed or installed over 5,000, or sorry, 4,000 employees into federal government. When you look into him, it looks like, his background is Russian. Now, whether that's just in family name, whether that's just his parents, we have to ask, where was this individual born? If he was indeed born in Russia, then the question is, can he lawfully be serving in our cabinet? Um, so I think that should be looked at. This individual also was a activist for John McCain's presidency campaign in 2008. And I've brought out some of the connections with John McCain in connection to the system. So that's some of the concerns. Then we have Suzanne Scott, who is the head CEO of Fox News. So um, I've brought out in my special report on Charlie Kirk some of the connections with other members of Fox News, um, and their connection with UREFI and the student loans and some of the things behind that. So I think that, there are things here that warrant concern. When we go further into the tribute, there are some key things that are picked up. Again, this is according to a pattern of practice based on my experience and how individuals in the system communicate. So some of those things that I want to bring out that may in fact act as triggers, especially if they're working in connection, um, are kind of between paragraphs 2 and 3. So, first, you have, things that it says here about Charlie. And again, I'm not saying anything specific against Charlie. I want to point out what I feel may be triggers that are being used in connection with images, things behind the scenes that are happening in this. So it says, he poured out his life into others, raising up a generation who would be bold in their faith. To me, that sounds like a call up. And it says, those who will be steadfast in their love and freedom and unafraid to defend their country. Now, we have to remember that within the system, you have individuals that are living dual lives. Um, they're living good Christian lives. That's their cover life. They're going to be active members in their areas, their regions, yet behind the scenes, they have their vows, their oaths, their other constitutions that are under the Luciferian Brotherhood and the Sovereign Military Order. These individuals are bound by both the Code of Silence, meaning that they can't talk about anything in regards to their Kabbalah, their magic, the Brotherhood, the Sovereign Military Order. They're bound to that Code of Silence from the time they're children. They're also bound to their Code of Brotherhood, which states that, it's their duty to love their brother. That's going to be beyond sexual. It's their duty to love their brother, which also includes providing for their brother's widows and children. But it's also their duty to cover their brother's sins. If their brother, needs somebody taken out, it's their job to do it. So, this very well could be a call up, raising up a generation who would hold or be bold in their faith. So, then we go on, it says, there's a connection here that his vision, everything kind of started for what he did in Lamont, Illinois. In my testimony, I talk about the connection with the system, the Chicago area, the Illinois area, and the underground there. It says it grew into one of the most powerful grassroots movements in America. Through Turning Point USA, Charlie ignited a fire in the hearts of tens of millions daily. He showed a generation that truth must never be silenced, that courage is contagious, and that freedom must be protected at all costs. So, again, is some of this being used as a call up? And down here it says, we honor him not only with our words, but with our actions. We will move forward together, fighting harder, standing taller, and refusing to surrender. They end with Matthew 25:23, from scripture, which says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Now we know that that verse that was spoken by the, Father over Jesus Christ. And again, that going back to if this is representing this image, who is the Spirit descending upon? You see that over the Son. So I'm again, just reiterating a pattern of practice and my experience, what I'm seeing, kind of what my concerns are. And I think that they warrant being, addressed and looked at immediately because of the nature of the concern. And I feel that, indeed there could be some of these things used to call up individuals with the intent to harm, with that target being directly at our president. So I thank you for looking into this. I want to thank you for listening today and for joining me on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com for another special report. Thank you.